Imagine waking up to a mystery that seems impossible to solve, one that haunts the hearts of many for nearly 3 decades. A young woman's life was tragically cut short, and yet no one could explain how or why. The case was labeled as an accident, but doubts lingered unanswered for 28 long years. Then, in an unexpected turn of events, the truth finally surfaced. What was hidden for so long? The case of Sister Abhaya has left more questions than answers until now. March 22, 1992. In the peaceful town of Kottayam, Kerala, a tragedy struck that would leave an entire community in shock. Sister Abhaya, a young and devoted nun, was found dead in a well inside the St. Pius Convent. At just 21 years old, she had a promising future ahead of her. Yet on that fateful morning, her life was cut short in a way that raised more questions than answers. The initial conclusion seemed clear. The police, after investigating, quickly ruled the death as a suicide. The narrative was simple. A troubled young woman had taken her own life. But something didn't sit right with many who knew Sister Abhaya. She was not known to be troubled. In fact, she was loved by her fellow sisters, respected by her peers, and had a life full of devotion and service. So why, then, would she end her life in such a brutal and unexpected way? Her body was discovered at the bottom of the convent's well, and though the authorities were quick to label it a suicide, a growing sense of unease began to spread. How could a person who had taken a vow of service, someone who seemed to have everything to live for, end up like this? Her family, her fellow nuns, and the community in Kottayam? No one was convinced. The pieces of the puzzle simply didn't fit. Sister Abhaya's death was quickly overshadowed by suspicion. Was it truly suicide? Or was there something far more complex and dangerous at play? As months turned into years, the case went cold, leaving behind a community with a deep, unsettling feeling that the truth was still hidden in the Sister Abhaya was not just a face in the crowd of nuns. She was a young woman with aspirations, dreams, and an unwavering sense of faith. Born Bina Thomas, she was raised in the small, tight-knit community of the Kottayam Catholics in Kerala, a community known for its deep spiritual roots and rich traditions. From an early age, Abhaya was surrounded by love and support from her family. She was described as a compassionate soul, someone who was always ready to help those in need, and she grew up with a strong desire to make a difference in the world. Her calling to become a nun wasn't something that came suddenly. Abhaya's decision to join the St. Pius Convent wasn't a fleeting moment of youthful idealism. It was a deep, spiritual commitment. She entered the convent to dedicate her life to serving others, to help the sick, the poor, and the marginalized. Her faith was her compass, and her future seemed bright. At the convent, she was known for her warm, approachable personality. She had a special gift for making people feel seen, heard, and valued. Her fellow sisters respected her, not only for her faith, but also for her calm, thoughtful nature. She wasn't a novice struggling with doubts, but a young woman firmly rooted in her mission, eager to make a meaningful impact in the world around her. Sister Abhaya's life in the convent was filled with a quiet devotion. Her days were spent in prayer, reflection, and helping those in need. But this young, vibrant woman, who dedicated herself so completely to the service of others, would soon become the victim of one of the most chilling and mysterious crimes to shake the region. Typical morning at the St. Pius the convent, but for some, it would quickly become anything but ordinary. Sister Abhaya had gone missing overnight, and her absence was immediately noted by her fellow nuns. When they searched the convent grounds, they found her body in the well, cold, lifeless, and barely a trace of what had happened. The discovery sent shockwaves through the convent. Abhaya, the bright, devoted nun, was now gone, and in such a tragic manner. The Kottayam was a familiar place for the nuns, now seemed a symbol of something far more chilling. Authorities were called in, and the initial response was swift. They quickly concluded that Abhaya had committed suicide. Why? Well, the reasoning was simple. At first glance, she had been under emotional stress. Some claimed she had been struggling with personal issues, perhaps depression, and had taken her own life in an unthinkable act of despair. The police investigation into the convent was less thorough than expected. No one questioned the conclusions, and no one seemed to dig deeper. It was a sad, tragic case of a young woman's emotional collapse, but something didn't sit right. The other nuns at the convent, the women who knew Abhaya better than anyone, were not convinced. They believed she was not the type to take her own life. She was too strong, too dedicated to her faith. To them, the idea of suicide seemed far-fetched. Yet the investigation carried on, and the case appeared closed. However, the true story was just beginning to unfold, hidden behind the walls of the very convent that was supposed to offer safety and solace. Sister Abhaya's tragic death was not the simple case it appeared to be. It was the beginning of a long, twisted journey, a mystery that would take decades to solve. From the very beginning, the investigation into Sister Abhaya's death was marred by flaws and inconsistencies. The police seemed all too eager to settle on the idea that it was a suicide after all. It fit the narrative of a troubled young woman who, in her emotional distress, took her own life. But as the investigation unfolded, serious questions began to arise. First, there was the speed with which the case was wrapped up. No thorough autopsy was performed initially. The police simply accepted the body's discovery in the well as confirmation of their theory. There were no immediate efforts to examine the scene in depth, no forensic analysis of the convent's environment, and no attempt to question those who knew Abhaya best, her fellow nuns and close friends. Those closest to Sister Abhaya, the ones who knew her personality, her aspirations, and her sense of purpose, were adamant. They couldn't believe she would take her own life. They described her as deeply committed to her faith, vibrant and full of hope. Why would someone so devoted suddenly end her life in such a violent manner? They questioned the police's rush to conclusions. Then, as the investigation continued, even more troubling signs came to light. A closer inspection of the body revealed injuries that didn't quite fit with the suicide theory. There were marks on Abhaya's head, bruises, and abrasions that seemed inconsistent with a simple fall into the well. And then there was the strange position of her body, as though it had been carefully placed, not just dropped. These inconsistencies were dismissed or overlooked by the authorities, who stuck with their original narrative of suicide. But the red flags didn't end there. In the days following her death, rumors began to circulate within the convent. Some of the nuns hinted at tensions in the convent's walls about the secrecy that surrounded certain relationships. Still, these whispers went largely ignored. The case seemed to lose momentum. No one would question the police's theory any further, at least not yet. In 1993, after mounting public pressure and widespread outrage over the handling of the case, the investigation was handed over to the Central Bureau of Investigation, or CBI. For many, this was the glimmer of hope that justice for Sister Abhaya might finally come to light. But despite the resources and expertise the CBI brought to the table, The breakthrough everyone was waiting for came slowly, if at all. The CBI began by re-interviewing witnesses and re-examining the evidence, but progress seemed sluggish. The convent, once a place of reverence and trust, now appeared to hold more secrets than anyone could have imagined. As investigators dug deeper, growing suspicions of foul play within the convent started to surface. Was it possible that those closest to Abhaya were hiding something darker? Something that no one had dared to reveal. The more the CBI pushed, the more unsettling the questions became, and soon the case would take a dramatic turn. As the CBI's investigation began to pick up pace, several key individuals were brought into focus, each of whom had some connection to Sister Abhaya. Among the primary suspects were two priests from the convent, Father Kyriakose and Father Thomas, along with a fellow nun, Sister Sephi. The question that everyone now wanted answered: what were their connections to Abhaya, and could they have been involved in her tragic death? Father Kyriakose, a man of authority within the convent, had been one of the first to discover Abhaya's body. His role seemed odd from the start, especially when investigators learned that he had been present at the convent the night before Abhaya's body was found. Was this a simple coincidence, or did it point to something far more sinister? Then there was Sister Sephi, another key figure. She was reportedly one of the last people to have seen Sister Abhaya alive. What was their interaction that night? Was there tension between the two? But the story didn't end there. Father Thomas, a close colleague of Father Kyriakose, had his own troubled history. Some believed he may have had a deeper involvement, perhaps even a hidden relationship with Sister Sephi, one that could explain why things seemed off. As the investigation progressed, theories started to form. Some suggested a crime of passion, perhaps a secret love affair gone wrong. Others speculated that Abhaya might have discovered something incriminating, something that threatened to expose the secrets lurking behind the convent's walls. The theories swirled, but one thing became clear. The story behind Sister Abhaya's death was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. It took nearly 28 years for the truth to finally surface. Years of painstaking investigation, countless interviews, and re-examinations of the evidence, all pointed to one undeniable fact. The story everyone had been told was a lie. The web of deception that had surrounded Sister Abhaya's death was more complex than anyone could have imagined, and the truth had been buried deep within the walls of the convent for almost 3 decades. The key breakthrough came in 2020 when the CBI, armed with new forensic tools, reopened the investigation. After years of no progress, fresh DNA evidence provided the clarity that had eluded investigators for so long. What was once considered an accidental death was now clear to be murder. The DNA linked the two priests, Father Kyriakose and Father Thomas, to the crime. This was the bombshell revelation that stunned the nation. Father Kyriakose and Father Thomas, both of whom had been involved in the case from the start, were arrested and charged with murder. But how had they managed to cover up their involvement for so long? How did they escape justice for nearly 30 years? The answer was buried in the very institutions that were supposed to protect the truth deep in the heart of the convent, where power, secrecy, and fear had allowed the crime to remain hidden. After nearly 3 decades of uncertainty and speculation, the case of Sister Abhaya finally reached the courtroom. With the arrest of Father Kyriakose and Father Thomas, the investigation had culminated in the most shocking of conclusions, but the journey to justice was far from over. The trial that followed was intense, with emotions running high as both the defense and prosecution presented their cases. The defense, naturally, tried to paint a different picture, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that the priests were being framed. They insisted that Father Kyriakose and Father Tomas had no part in Abhaya's tragic death, that the DNA evidence was misleading or inconclusive. However, the prosecution's case was solid, built on the undeniable forensic evidence and DNA analysis that linked the two priests to the crime scene, as well as testimonies and reenactments that pieced together the puzzle of Abhaya's last moments. The prosecution laid bare the facts. Abhaya had been murdered, and it wasn't a suicide as the initial police report had suggested. The courtroom was gripped with tension as the truth finally came to light. After months of deliberation, the verdict was read. Father Kyriakose and Father Thomas were convicted of Sister Abhaya's murder. The long-awaited justice had been delivered, and the case that had haunted Kerala for almost 30 years was at last closed. But the consequences were far-reaching. For the community that had once trusted these priests, the betrayal was unimaginable. The emotional toll on Sister Abhaya's family was profound, as they had waited nearly 3 decades for this moment. While the conviction brought a sense of justice, the wounds it left behind were deep, both for Abhaya's loved ones and for the community that had been shattered by the truth. As the gavel came down, the weight of the moment was felt by everyone in the courtroom and beyond. Justice had been served, but at a heavy cost. When the truth about Sister Abhaya's death was finally revealed, it sent shockwaves not only through Kerala, but across the entire Indian community. The case, which had been shrouded in secrecy for almost 30 years, ignited an intense public outcry. How could a tragedy of this magnitude remain unsolved for so long? How had the system failed to deliver justice for a young woman who had given her life to service and faith? The media coverage was relentless as news outlets from across the country followed the trial closely. For many, the case was more than just a crime. It was a symbol of something much larger, an institutional failure. The Catholic Church, long revered and trusted by many, now found itself at the center of scrutiny. The very institution that had provided sanctuary to Sister Abhaya was now being questioned for its role in concealing the truth. It wasn't just a matter of one woman's life lost. It had become a glaring indictment of corruption, secrecy, and the abuse of power within religious institutions. The case also brought to light the darker side of the case of Sister Abhaya will always be remembered as a chilling reminder of how power, corruption, and silence can obscure the truth. For 28 long years, the mystery of her death went unsolved, hidden behind the walls of the convent and the institutions that were meant to protect her. But despite the darkness that surrounded her story, Abhaya's death became a symbol of resilience and a testament to the courage of those who refused to let the truth die. The justice that eluded her for so long was finally served, but the scars of this case will linger for many. It's a stark reminder that even the most sacred institutions can harbor deep secrets, and that the fight for justice is often harder than we imagine. Sister Abhaya's story is no longer one of mystery, but of a life lost and a truth finally revealed. The case may be closed, but the questions it raised about accountability, trust, and corruption in powerful institutions will continue to echo long after. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime cases that demand justice. What do you think about the Sister Abhaya case? Do you believe justice was truly served, or are there still unanswered questions? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case and its shocking revelations. Leave a comment below with your opinions, theories, or anything else that stood out to you. If you found this story compelling, make sure to hit the like button And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that unravel mysteries, expose hidden truths, and challenge everything we thought we knew. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.